Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. David Graves, an experienced biblical archaeologist and CEO of Electronic Christian Media. I'm here today with another exciting episode on our Archaeology Discoveries channel, where we discuss important archaeological artifacts related to the Bible. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.
Well, welcome people. Today we have an interesting topic. My special guest, Dr. David Graves, is here again, PhD from Aberdeen, Scotland, is where he got his PhD from. This is really good. He's going to have a witness to individuals mentioned in the New Testament. So we could say individuals identified outside the biblical narrative. And to put that in perspective for a lot of us, if you're familiar with the Tel Dan inscription, where it mentions David, which it was excavated around 1992, 1993. And for many years, scholars would say, well, we don't know if David really existed because we don't have evidence for David, outside the biblical narrative. But that changed. And now we do. And the stele is actually displayed in the Israel Museum. And Dr. Grave is going to share us more experiences through archaeology, the relevancy of finding names of individuals that are mentioned in the New Testament. That's going to be our adventure today with Dr. Graves, and I'm glad to have him on our program. So this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. My name is George Sparks, and our guest is Dr. David Graves, PhD. Welcome to our program, sir.
Good to be with you, George, as always. And we're going to be talking today about, a couple of individuals that are mentioned in the New Testament that we now find also confirmed in the archaeological record. I'll get my PowerPoint started up here, and we can begin with some of the material. So the two individuals we're going to be talking about are Gallio and Erastus. And I've subtitled it, Luke Got It Right. I did my PhD, as you mentioned, at the University of Aberdeen, and one of the scholars there was in the last century was Dr. William Ramsey, and he did his professorship there, dealing with. He was a Luke specialist, and so he goes to Asia Minor, thinking that as he was taught, none of this stuff was historically accurate. It's all a fable. And lo and behold, he discovers the places are where they were mentioned in the scripture, in the book of Acts, in the book of Luke. And we find that, sure enough, we have the name of Gallio and Erastus mentioned in inscriptions. We're going to look at the Gallio one first. If you want to look them up, the translations, there's the references for them, IG and SIG. Those are abbreviations for the translation of the texts. It's based on the work that I've placed in the Archaeology of Biblical People, as well as the Archaeology of the New Testament. So those are the two books that consider and look at the references for Gallio, or sometimes called the Delphi inscription because it was actually discovered in Delphi. And here is the inscription here on the right, etched in ancient Greek, discovered in 1905 by the French archaeologist Émile Bugot. And there are 4 fragments, and in 1910 three more fragments plus one were published in 1967 by André Plessart. Preserved in the Delphi Museum in Delphi, and there are the numbers for the different parts and pieces of them. And it confirms that Gallio was the prefect of Achaia, based in Corinth at the time of Paul, as Luke records in Acts 18, verses 12 to 17. Around the summer of AD 51, and provides a precise chronological anchor for the book of Acts, which places Paul in Corinth in 51 AD. So this is very, very important because we have to have these archaeological anchors. And in the Old Testament, we use the Egyptian chronology as the archaeological anchors. But in the New Testament, this is the one that anchors the dates for us. And that's why it is so important as an inscription. It helps to determine a timeline for Paul and his travels. I've created my own timeline for Paul, and it's in my books at the end. But the anchor for that chronology is found in the inscription. The first convert in Corinth was Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, by the name of Crispus. And Paul was in Corinth for a year and a half preaching, according to Acts 18. While Paul baptized Crispus and Gaius, he didn't baptize many, lest any should say that I baptized in mine own name. So when the Jews complained to Gallio, the Roman proconsul of Achaia, he dismissed their arguments as only a disagreement among the Jews. So this is the context in which we find the name Gallio in Luke, or by Luke, in Acts. He's a proconsul. Acts 18 says that all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat, the bema. I believe that's the bema behind us there. And Gallio cared for none of those things. So the name Gallio is mentioned in the biblical text. And the Greek inscription is also sometimes called the Delphi. As I mentioned, it's discovered in the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. This is it here on the right. The remains in Greece. And 9 fragments were uncovered in 1908 that date to the time of the Roman Emperor Claudius, 41 to 54 AD. And it mentions Lucius Junius Gallio Annaeus. That's the name found in Pliny's writings, an ancient historian, the proconsul or governor of Corinth in either 51 or 52 of the newly constituted senatorial province of Achaia. Joseph Fitzmyer has translated it accordingly here. Acclaimed imperator for the 26th time, and this is the name of Julianus Gallio. Kostenberger, well-known New Testament scholar, says this historical note is particularly helpful since Roman custom dictated that Roman officials in the senatorial provinces should hold office for only 1 year, and the terms of proconsuls typically extended from July the 1st to July 1st of the following year. So they only ruled from July to July of 1 year. So that's very important because that pinpoints the date very, very accurately for us. And that's what helps us determine the chronology of the life of Paul in the book of Acts. It's based on the mention of the 26th acclamation of Claudius in the letter, and scholars agree that it was published in July of AD 52. Novak says, while the dates of 25th and 26th acclamation are not known, they could not have occurred before late 51 CE and must have been prior to August the 1st of 52 CE, when Claudius was acclaimed for the 27th time. So it's pretty accurate. We know these dates based on the significance of the acclamation and when the proconsuls were ruling. So both Gallio and Claudius are mentioned on this inscription and in the New Testament. So we have a double confirmation. There's the references there. And Acts provides a secure date, as I mentioned, to AD 52, assists in determining the time of Paul's trip to Corinth in Acts 18, the summer of about AD 51. So July to July. It determines Paul's trial before Gallio in the summer of AD 51 as well. So most dates used to indicate the time of Paul's missionary trips are derived from this particular date and the mention of Gallio that we now have confirmed in the archaeological record in Delphi, Greece. We're going to talk now about the Erastus inscription, which is another one mentioned in the same chapter, chapter 18 of Acts, verse 4. Here is the inscription here on the left. It's discovered in Corinth, excavating in 1928 and 29. Erastus mentioned by Paul in Romans and also in Acts, as well as in 2 Timothy. And while Paul was in Corinth, he wrote and sent greeting letters from some of the Christians to the church in Rome. So that's why we have it picked up in Corinth and in Rome. And among them was one named Erastus, whom Paul described as in Greek, the oikonomos, adole, or adelis. Now, the ESV translates it as the city treasurer, NIV, director of public works, and the King James is the chamberlain of the city. So there's various ways we understand these Greek words. They're not all confirmed or uniform, but each city had yearly elected a magistrate and a senate. And the city manager, the adoles, were also elected annually and managed public works in the city, including the financial income. So they're like a financial accountant of the city. And Erastus is also mentioned in 2 Timothy 4, as well as Acts 19. And most scholars accept them as the same person. Some debate that, of course, as with everything, but I think there's no doubt that they were the same person in Corinth mentioned on the inscription. And so it was excavated in 1928-29, uncovered 3 slabs of hard white limestone with the inscription that read, Erastus pro Adelios sp stratit. Erastus, in return for the aedileship, paved this road at his own expense. We find these kind of inscriptions commonly in the New Testament period, where a particular individual had dedicated a building or a pavement or a road or a temple, and they had their name put on it as the one who built it or had given money to have it built. And so Erastus paid to have the street paved in return for an appointment as either the city engineer or the chief of public works, the adole. And so that's the significance of the inscription. Is he the same Erastus? Murphy O'Connor says Since the pavement was laid before the middle of the 1st century AD, this individual is identified with the Erastus, who was city treasurer at the time of Paul and a Christian in Romans 16. Friesen, another New Testament scholar who I know, I relied on his material quite often, says since 1929, many specialists have claimed that Paul's oikonomos, manager of a household, oikos means house, nomos means the household, the manager. So we have a manager of a household. Erastus was identical to an aristocratic Erastus named in a Latin inscription from Corinth. In this chapter, I argue that we can disentangle the inked Erastus from the inscribed one. They were two different individuals, according to Friesen. One from a higher sector of elite society, and the other from a lower level. So Friesen doesn't think they're the same person. I don't think he's right. I think he's wrong. I think they are the same person. But while this is unlikely to be the same person mentioned by Paul, he says it does indicate that Erastus was a well-known name in Corinth and fits the cultural setting of the 1st century. Now, certainly there may have been many different Erastuses, but it wasn't a real common name, so I think it's unlikely. I think they're probably the same person. And also because the title, the oikonomos, is the manager of a household, is the same word used in both inscriptions. So there's the two individuals with inscriptions that are help us confirm that Luke wrote in a time period where he recognized these as being culturally significant and common, and identified with the places where they were written from. So we have Corinth, and then we also have Rome. So that's my take on two of the inscriptions. Next week we'll look at another one, Sergius Paulus, and there's actually, I think, 4 inscriptions that bear his name.
Well, that's pretty interesting on archaeological level. You actually find validations of an individual mentioned in a scriptural narrative, of course, in the New Testament, and also it brings credibility to the text written by Paul. Now, I'm sure that possibly that the laity, the general population in the church, if you will, probably doesn't realize the academic value of this, because the letters of Paul have been under scrutiny for quite a while. How many are, like pseudo, and how many are legit? And I believe it's items like this. I'm going to shut up because I see you're getting ready to say something, to help validate that Paul was there. These people existed at a time that, as you said, I didn't even know that. Only a year. And Paul would have to be there to make that statement, which would bring credibility to that letter, and really help the text. Is that also, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And also Luke in Acts. So Luke in Acts was a doctor, and he was very meticulous in the language that he used. In fact, there's been a whole series of writings and book that has been written just on the medical vocabulary that Luke used in the book of Acts. That's how meticulous he was at actually picking the exact word that would have been known at that time period, giving it its historical accuracy. And we find another example of it here. Within a year, so we know the date, where that word could not have been used outside of that year.
Right. But as you're saying, it lends credibility to the author in the books of the New Testament, if
Yeah,
you
Luke
will.
and Paul.
And uh, and I'm sure a lot of people probably would say, okay, so we have identified these individuals. What's the significance of that? And it actually could have a huge consequence on the validation of a biblical text. And for some people that in their walk of faith need that validation when texts are being scrutinized, this could bring a certain degree of comfort. Let me just add that, if that's fair.
And also, we know exactly the year in which Paul was there,
Right.
because we have a definite identifier and a pin in the map, as it were, of the timeline, telling us when Paul was there, and that helps us date everything else in Paul's life and timeline.
Well, I guess we still got to be patient because even though we have the year, we don't have the month and the time. So if we can get down to exact month, and I'm just, I think
Yeah.
year's good enough. When you think over a course of 2,000 years, and you're finding fragments of stones, and you're looking at a slab within a pavement, and you think like, okay, how when you say a pavement, how and is that also a road? Is that a pavement stone, but in a road? And somebody said, hey, you think this just might be that guy that's mentioned in the New Testament? So it is pretty amazing. Let me ask you this: how long do you think scholars have known about these discoveries? Let me rephrase that. When were these discoveries made, and how I'll know how long they?
Yeah.
Well,
19,
you can make the discovery and still not make the connection. So,
yeah, 1929. It's been studied quite extensively, but yeah, from the late 20s onward, they knew about these inscriptions, and they've been available to scholars, and they've been writing about them ever since. So,
okay, so it's been almost a century now. 1920. We're looking 90 years more.
yeah.
So that's
And Friesen, who I mentioned, is quite critical on a lot of New Testament materials, and he tries to make a case that they're not the same person. I don't think it's as strong a case as it to dissuade me, but again, it's debated even yet. But
right.
what I think is very important is we have the name, we have the circumstance of what he's doing for a job description, and we have three Greek words that connect him all together in the biblical text. So I think that's very, very important. And I wouldn't write it off. So
Okay. And it does mention like his occupation too, what he was, what they were actually doing, like he was a bookkeeper or something for the city.
yeah, I know
Financier.
he was a manager of the home or household.
Oh, manager. So he's kind of like Joseph.
And adulake. So it's a Greek word that talks about the an important manager of the finances within the city that was appointed only once a year for each city. So a role that was important, a role that Luke acknowledges and recognizes, and one that if somebody just made the story up, would not understand or know what that person's role was.
Right.
So he had to be there as a eyewitness testimony of what took place and what happened, using the vocabulary and the names of people who actually existed. And now we find a plaque with his name on it saying, I paid to have this road built.
Okay, so real quick, if we want some more information, which one of those books behind you would this information be in?
Okay, well, it would be the Archaeology of the New Testament. And yeah.
I got this right. There we go.
And he's dealt with in that with all the footnotes So you can look up all the academic references for that. We also have the Archaeology of Biblical People, because Erastus is mentioned in the New Testament.
Gives people idea of what's all included in here. A lot of breakouts.
Yeah. There's a bema.
Okay. Well, I don't want to do this too much because
actually you just picked out Gallio. There's Gallio. No, right there. That's the Gallio inscription.
Yeah, yeah, you said it was in like four separate pieces.
Yeah, 4 separate pieces.
Well, ain't that that was just by random. So I don't know if I should play the lottery today or not.
Yeah, that's great providential.
Yeah, right. So here we go. This is
Archaeology of the New Testament, and then the Archaeology of Biblical People has the same similar material in it.
Okay.
I combine all the biblical people in that other book, and this one deals with all the archaeological material from the New Testament.
So you can say it's just a little bit of your book, but all that information that he just gave on the slides is right in here. And this is just a little bit. So as a resource, can you tell that I got some new crowns, a resource? So a resource, material for yourself, your family, for your pastor of your church. His books are great material. And I do recommend them, folks. And it doesn't matter. It's archaeology, it's history. So it doesn't matter if you're Presbyterian or Baptist. We just don't, that's not going to be an issue. All right. Even Pentecostal can get this. No problems. All right, people. I got them. I use them. It makes me really smart. I don't give him any credit. I'll use this hand because you're on that side. I'd never give you any credit because it makes me so smart, right? Except on the podcast. That's it.
George, even the atheists can get something out of them.
There you go. I forgot about the atheists and the agnostics and
yeah. So it's something for everyone.
And so people, once again, I do recommend his books. Doctor, thank you for your time. That was I'm glad that you shared that, and I hope that validate, you can say, the integrity of the scripture. If you're in a Bible study, that would be great material. So how can we validate certain books in the New Testament? Maybe this could be just a little part of it and make the discussion a lot more fun. Once again, thanks for your time and your effort and these wonderful PowerPoints. It's always a pleasure.
You're welcome, George. Good to be with you again.
Okay, thank you.